Professor Choi. I'm recording this video for those of you who are nervous about the prospect of reading poems out loud into the world. This video includes some tips and tricks and kind of practice exercises that might be useful to you as you are figuring out how to read poems. So the first piece of advice that I will give is to choose the right poem. Not all poems are going to be the best poems of yours to read out loud. What I recommend is to choose a poem that has stuff for a listener to latch onto right away. So that might be a really clear premise, or it might be a narrative structure, or it might be some jokes, or it might be lots of good crunchy sounds or striking imagery. It's okay to specifically choose a poem that somebody will be able to kind of understand at least some part of it right away. That might not be your favorite poem, but it might be the one that does best in a reading. That said, a poem that seems to be really visual and kind of impossible to read out loud might also be a good challenge for figuring out how to read at a reading, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Second tip is to practice reading your poem out loud. Practice reading it to yourself, practice reading it to a friend. It teaches you a lot to have somebody actually listening. Get familiar with the syllables, get familiar with the progression of the thing, when to take a breath so you don't run out of breath. Figure out which lines are going to be a little trickier for you to get through the sounds, and so you might have to slow down a little bit. And also, it's generally a good idea to time yourself anyway to get kind of a sense of how much time you're taking up for readings. The third tip is to go a lot slower than you might think. You are hearing this poem out loud for maybe the millionth time, but the person on the other end is hearing it for the first time. So you want to slow down so that they can catch every little consonant and syllable that you've got in this beautiful line that you've worked really hard to craft. So as an example, I'll just read a poem of mine. If I were just sort of like reading it out loud to myself or something, I might say, "As if softness were proof of anything but a promise to rot, I walked into another day dressed in my finest tongues." But it's hard to hear that, and so at a reading I would read it something more like, "As if softness were proof of anything but a promise to rot, I walked into another day dressed in my finest tongues." So that's like maybe a little bit slow, but you get the idea. Tip number 4 is to read your poem in a lot of different ways. So, for example, that time I was reading my poem really slowly, but reading it in a lot of different ways will help you kind of break out of the vocal patterns that you might have gotten trapped into without even knowing it. And it might teach you about stuff that's there that you didn't realize was there. I would recommend doing a reading, at least a few readings, where you're reading really for the consonants, really digging into all of the sounds. I'd also recommend reading it as if you were explaining something that was like a really difficult concept to somebody who is trying to understand it. Read it like you're excitedly trying to explain something really fast to somebody that just happened to you. Read it like a cowboy. Try reading it in lots of different ways, even if they make you feel silly. And if nothing else, it will probably help you memorize the poem. Tip number 5 is to try to listen to your poem in different ways. Sometimes when I'm trying to understand the rhythm of a line, I read it slowly and sort of like nod or tap my foot as I go, kind of when it seems best to nod or tap my foot, and that teaches me a lot about the rhythm. Last ditch date when the Zyrtec won't work, needlepoint system punch, chemical glow up, whack-a-moling symptoms into sawdust. If you do this, you can learn things about the rhythm of a line. And the other way that I would definitely recommend listening to yourself, even if you might hate it, is to record yourself. You learn a lot, even if it is painful to watch the video or to listen to the audio recording after. Tip number 6 is to lean into the words themselves rather than trying to predict the effect. Rather than trying to say, for example, this poem is sad, and so I need it to sound sad, and so I'll read it sadly. Often if you try to do that kind of like predicting the effect, it sounds corny or like fake. And so I think the better thing to do is to understand that your sad poem has sadness baked into the words that you chose. If you've done your job as a poet, you've chosen sad sounds and you've chosen sad words. You have to do some of the kind of like predicting thing, but when in doubt, I would lean more heavily toward trying to get the words themselves to shine as much as possible. Okay, 7. Is it's okay if the poem as performed is different from the poem as written. So, what I mean by that is the version of the poem that you read out loud might not look exactly like it does on the page. This can be as kind of small and basic as your line breaks, which you spent time crafting, will not be preserved, and that's okay. It's a different thing, right? It's actually impossible for your performance to be 100% faithful in its representation of what is there on the page. You can approach this in a lot of different ways, though, especially when it comes to work that has visual elements that are really important for the meaning making of the poem. So, for example, if you've got some sort of experimental spacing happening or lots of white space, you can, if you want, choose to try to recreate that effect that you've crafted on the page using one of the tools of performance that aren't available to you on the page. You might take like a breath of silence, or you might cut yourself off in the middle of a word to jump to another word or something. You might forego this whole thing and just project your poem onto a screen if you're reading in a screen, or if you can screen share something, right? Or you could just say, this is just going to be a different thing, and I'm not going to try to recreate the effects that are on the page. And then the other thing is that you might end up making edits to your poem that make it more conducive to read out loud. So that last sentence, maybe in order for it to really hit in a performance, like maybe you need to make that sentence a little longer or something, right? It's okay. When I read poems out of my book, a lot of times there are lines that are tweaked slightly so that a listener can follow along to what I'm saying. And yeah, that's all right. Okay, tip number 8 is try to read in your own voice. There is this thing called poet voice, right? And there are lots of different kinds of poet voice. There's like slam voice, and academic poet voice. If one of those voices, if embodying the rhythm of a slam poet is helpful for you in having the confidence necessary to read your poem out loud, then that is great, fine. But I generally would encourage people to try to read poems as closely to their own natural speaking voice as possible. One very small tip that Jamila Woods taught me many years ago was I was reading poems, and it turned out that I was like reading all of my poems in a much higher register than my regular speaking voice. And so she made me read my poems in a robot voice, and I had been going up here and then doing it in the robot voice. She was like, that's your actual natural pitch. I say all this, and I know that I have a very intense poet voice, like a reading voice. So, yeah, I don't know if maybe this is not actually advice that I am myself following, but much like our creative writerly voices, our performance voices are also things that we develop over time and make intentional choices about. For example, like Ilya Kaminsky reads in a way that's very different from his regular speaking voice. And if you are trying things that are out of the box, making really intentional performance choices in order to like see what it's like to do it that way, that's also okay. Like, experiment, have fun with it. Number 9 is to remember that people are rooting for you. This is something that Sarah Kay, the poet Sarah Kay, often says, but people don't really go to poetry readings hoping that they'll suck. People go to events like this in order to see folks shine, and they want to see people do well. So if you can remember that it's not just like you against the music, but that you're all kind of in it together and everybody wants to see you do well as much as you do, then sometimes that can, I think, alleviate some of the pressure and the fear. Okay, and then in lieu of a number 10, I was just thinking of some really basic, like practical tips specifically for reading at digital readings. One would be to try to find good lighting. As you can see, I have found amazing lighting. Try to find a background that won't be weird. I've kind of violated this advice. This is not necessarily the most interesting background, but I've seen people put up like a piece of cloth, or just have like a blank wall behind you, or like move your plants so that it looks like you can take care of plants. Know that because of connectivity issues that you may actually have to read more clearly than you might normally, go even slower. And then most importantly actually is that digital readings are really weird for the people reading in that there's no applause. It can be really jarring and weird to just read into the abyss. I'm still trying to figure out what to do with that. If there's a chat function and it's nice for you to see people saying like, yay, good job, do that. Know that people are listening and locked in and paying attention and appreciative of the thing that you're giving them. And then if all else fails, it might be a nice idea to have somebody in the room with you behind the camera clapping silently for you, so that you don't feel totally alone, and so that you're at least reading to someone. So those are my tips for reading poems out loud. But overall, just know that, again, people are rooting for you. No matter what you do, reading a poem to somebody that you've written is a gift. And rather than being like, oh my God, sorry for taking up your time, just to remember that you have given them a gift that they're going to walk away from and cherish is maybe the most important thing. So, okay, best of luck with all of your readings, and see you on Instagram Live.